Hey guys, it's Dakota. Welcome back to my channel. It's been a little bit of a long time. It's been 2 good weeks where we haven't seen each other. And throughout those 2 weeks, I've done a lot. I started a new job, I started school, and I read the Bible a lot because I need to repent after watching whatever the hell this is. The season was so bad, so bad. It was so bad that it actually makes me happy that some of my other favorite shows got canceled so that they couldn't end up that bad. It was one of the worst things I have ever seen in my entire life, and that's what I'm here to talk about today. This video might be a little all over the place because I'm kind of just like ranting, but if you saw it, you will get it. I actually told my sister just to not watch this season at all because it was such a waste of time. Not only was it a bad season, but it actually pretty much invalidates the entire rest of the series. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. So let's start at the beginning. Let's start at the end of season 3. So once again, at the end of season 3, the Umbrella Academy almost dies. No shocker there. Their marigold is extracted in this big machine, and then they survive, they pop out the other end, but they lost their powers. Everybody decides to move on and live their lives like normal, and then as the camera zooms away, you notice that Reginald Hargreaves owns almost everything. And he has Abigail back, but she's kind of irrelevant, let's be honest. So naturally, watchers are thinking, oh, everything that Hargreaves has ever done was so he can create a world centered around him where he gets everything he wants. But we also see a really cool shot of someone that looks like Ben on a train in South Korea, which was so cool because a lot of us are immediately thinking, oh my gosh, do they have like real life doubles that were never created with the marigold? They were born like organically? Spoiler alert, nothing ever comes of that. Nothing. Something I forgot to mention, I think that Aidan Gallagher said this, was that the 3rd season made pretty much no money, so the 4th season was a gift from Netflix to the fans. I think I would have rather had them just cancel it. There was also only 6 episodes in this season, so chances are what happened was there was originally 10 episodes that were cut down to 6, which kind of explains a lot of the plot holes and how things don't really make sense. But you can't blame cutting down a show on it just being absolute trash. They could have made like a really well thought out final movie type thing that was just like 2 or 2.5 hours that wrapped everything up and made it a good ending. Instead, they gave us 6 episodes of the worst thing I've ever seen in my entire life. A true waste of my time. So we talked about the unaddressed ending of the 3rd season, but the thing about the 4th season was that there was really no good plot lines, like at all. Or at the very least, they weren't explored enough to be good. Like the train that goes in between dimensions, that could have been done really well, but again, I don't know if it's because they had to cut it down. It really was just irrelevant, and the only thing it did was force... I take that back. It didn't force anything. It did not force Five and Lila to get together. That was Steve Blackman, and that was a mistake. It was weird and out of character. Lila, whose parents are alive and somehow immigrated from the UK to the US, I don't know how either, but I guess they did. But Lila doesn't want to be a stay-at-home mom to Diego because she needs more excitement in her life, and yet she's happy to hang around Five and be his like cottagecore. Huh? And a lot of people are out here saying, oh, like it makes sense for Five because he's morally gray. Yes, but also not really. Five is morally gray because he killed like a lot of people. But everything Five did, he truly believed was for the greater good. Seeing his dead siblings reset his brain. All he wanted to do his entire life was protect them, even if he was an asshole and he was shooting people. But he was getting the job done. This whole video is going to be like Dakota try to make sense for 5 minutes challenge. Anyway, Five throwing out all respect for his brother makes no sense. Even if he fell in love with Lila, truly his character earlier would have never acted on something like that. And a lot of people are like, oh, the scene must have been so weird to film because one actor was like 20 and the other one was like in her early 30s. I'm not exactly sure how old she is. And honestly, they're actors, like, they're fine. However, I always thought it was really weird how in season 3, Lila's like in the bath and they start fighting each other. What was the point of that? Like, he was technically, like, bodily 5, the character was 13 years old, fighting a fully grown naked woman. Like, this fight could have taken place anywhere, so these seeds of like weird sexual stuff with Aidan Gallagher started pretty early. Even in like the earlier seasons, the handler kind of, the way she spoke to him, I didn't think a lot of it because, you know, nothing happened. But now later with these things actually happening in the story, it's a little, who wrote that? I'm just curious, like, who actually wrote that? Oh, I remember watching it too and being like, oh, like I think I shut my eyes and I was like, no, why, no. And the worst part was that it was so funny when at the beginning, Diego thought that Lila was cheating and she was like, that's your brother. Anyway, also Klaus was like a prostitute. And I think the only reason why that was left in, because it had zero relevancy to the plot, even there barely was a plot, let's be honest. But I think Klaus just wasn't really in any of the important stuff that was going on, so they had to like create this side plot for him, or keep this side plot, I guess. Somebody else also said that it was like directly out of the comics. I don't know, I never read the comics, so that would make sense. But it's still, you had to cut down time so much and you left that in, but not stuff that was like actually important. And I love Klaus too, and it was enjoyable that he was a germaphobe in the beginning and that he actually stayed in character more so than other people, but still I would have rathered everything else made more sense than gave Klaus more screen time. Also, I had no idea what was going on with Jennifer pretty much any of the time. She popped out of a giant squid, and then she was living in a town, and then she got captured by Ron Swanson. And David Crane was there, and he's a big actor, so you'd think if he was there, he would have like a really important part. He didn't. And then they like throw Jennifer into a barn with a giant squid, and she's like screaming. Nothing is addressed of that. I need to breathe, because I keep speaking, and I don't think that the words are making any sense. There is one plotline that I actually really enjoyed, and I thought was going to be the basis of everything, that it was once again not really addressed, but we'll get to that later. So let's talk about plot holes right now, and let me just say there were so many that I can't even keep track of them all. So I will inevitably miss something at some point in this video. So we talked about the end of season 3 with Ben on the train to Seoul and Hargreaves owning like everything, and we also mentioned Lila's parents being in the US. Welcome to the United States of America, baby, USA. But a big thing that's never addressed in season 4 is any of the other people that had powers. They just quite literally never show up. Not even Sloane, who was Luther's wife in the 3rd season. Especially because when they drink the marigold, Klaus, because he's sober and doesn't want to drink the sake, throws it directly onto someone behind him. It was very clear on camera that they wanted you to see that that little bit was thrown onto another person and that Klaus didn't drink it. Am I wrong to have assumed that that was probably Marcus or Alfonso? I think it's Alfonso. Also, fun fact, Alfonso is played by the guy that played the werewolf in My Babysitter's a Vampire. Yes, of course I noticed that. That was actually the show I was talking about when I was like, oh, you know what, maybe it's a good thing that it was canceled. Anyway, after they consumed the marigold, their powers were no longer blue, they were red. And that's the same way that Harlan was in the 3rd season as well. This is, again, never addressed. They could have said like, oh, because the kids were conceived with marigold by people that loved each other instead of just drinking it out of like greed, I guess. Somehow their powers were more like good. The writers didn't know apparently either. Also, Ray is just gone. He's just gone. If you didn't want to bring him into the 4th season, you should have just had him stayed in the 1960s in the 2nd season, because that would have been so much more on character than having him be like, oh, I'm actually gonna be an absentee father. Anyway, the marigold being red instead of blue bothered me a lot, because even like if it wasn't important to the plot that they were creating at the time, they could have just CGI'd it to be blue instead of red, and it would have made more sense. Because they didn't, we're just left with all these unanswered questions, and I can't even finish a sentence. That's how frustrated I am. Anyway, at one point, Lila is using laser eyes and Klaus can fly. I do think someone said something about, like, in the comics, all the Umbrella Academy members have, like, other powers as well, so that might have been what they were trying to, like, go for. But with Lila having laser eyes and she mimics people, am I wrong to have taken it as somebody else with powers is somewhere nearby? Is that crazy? And when Klaus, and I think it was Luther, flew when they were trying to, like, fight Ben, I was like, oh, here's Sloane, like, she made them, like, float out of danger. Nope, he just did that. I talked about Jennifer. I'll kind of touch on the Jennifer incident later, but again, her character had pretty much no relevance, even though it seemed to be a pretty important plotline originally. And again, justice for David Crane. And the ending of the whole entire series didn't make sense to me. At first, I didn't realize that there was only 6 episodes instead of 10, so when they're all, like, waiting to die, I actually expected the Sparrow Academy and, like, other people with powers to, like, show up and save them. No, they just died. Because somehow them dying in the present fixes the past. How does that make sense? How? Because they died in the original apocalypse, but the world didn't get better, and this monster from the 4th season was absorbing, like, the entire planet. It just ate them and, like, combusted, and everything was fine. Like, not even the stuff that was already destroyed was destroyed. Like, everything just went skippity-doo-dah, like, all back good as new. It really does make no sense. And just like a little thing, nitpicking, Diego and Lila's family and Allison's daughter are transported into, like, another dimension, I guess. But at the end of the series, not only are the Umbrella Academy people dead, they never existed to begin with. So if the other characters are in other dimensions and their parents never existed to begin with, wouldn't that just create another grandfather paradox? Girl, you could have gave me like $50 and a chocolate bar and I would have made this season better. Just with this camera right here, I could have made a better Umbrella Academy season 4. The most interesting plotline in season 4 was, of course, the converging timelines. People are remembering stuff from the original timeline, and they're even finding artifacts that are evidence of the original timeline. And these people are treated like conspiracy nuts, and like they make no sense, and it's like a joke that the guy's like, oh, I think Reginald Hargreaves is an alien. But this really was a really good idea, and it could have been explored so well if it was just the main focus. Okay, so now let's talk about how I think that the Umbrella Academy should have ended. For starters, like I said, they should have either had 1 long-form episode or 2 to 3 regular-length episodes. So basically, the whole thing with Hargreaves was that he was trying to reset the world to be exactly as he wanted it, and maybe he even tried this with other worlds and failed and they got destroyed. The time skip in the beginning was okay. It let you see Diego and Lila's lives later. Luther being a stripper was pretty funny, and Klaus being a germaphobe was also pretty entertaining. But I do wish that Allison would have been a little bit more happy, especially if she had Ray. So instead of having the Umbrella Academy meet up and all drink the marigold, I would say that somehow it would escape and like go back to who it was supposed to go back to. Maybe like a jar was dropped. Something. I didn't write it. If you gave me money to write it, I could come up with something really good. So then, because all the marigold escapes, there should be 46 supers once again. And the first clue that somebody is around is that, of course, Lila has her laser eyes. I would keep the Durango because it was pretty interesting, but I would get rid of pretty much the entire Jennifer plotline because it just wasn't done right, and I don't even know how to make good sense of it. And then the main plotline should be the converging timelines and the possibility of the end of the world. You could also include Jean and Jean, but I would honestly make them kind of less evil and more like quirky, kind of friends with Lila, and they kind of give clues as to what's going on and like help them figure it out. I do like the subway plotline, but it's too complicated and there's just not enough time to explain all of it. And I would definitely take out everything that happened down there. But the main guy in this season should be Ben. Ben has no idea where his Sparrow siblings are. He only has the Umbrella Academy. And even though the Academy keeps telling him that he's their brother, he has no connection to them at all. And he's just so distraught and unbelonging. So I think that because the Marigold and the Durango were not natural elements, they were created, they're the reason why this stuff with the timelines is going on. They basically war with each other because they're opposites and they cause the timeline to split, and they're also like repeatedly ripping it apart and smashing it back together like an atomic bomb. So weird stuff starts to happen. You could kind of go the Into the Spider-Verse route where things start to appear different, or stuff just like buildings just collapse because they're like not supposed to be there in the other timeline. I would play with it if I was the writer, but somewhere in the story, because of the converging timelines, Ben starts to remember the original timeline. And he died because he remembers that he was protecting his siblings from the Durango. There's this whole emotional storyline about how there's really no Umbrella Ben or Sparrow Ben. They're both just Ben, and he's a really good guy. Meanwhile, other supers keep showing up because they're attracted to the Durango, and Victor's like, oh, I'm gonna take all the Marigold into myself and then interact with all the Durango at once so that instead of warring over time, they just mutually destroy each other, which would hopefully snap the timeline back into place. Then Ben comes to Victor and tries to convince him to put the Marigold inside of Ben instead, because he now knows that he is not supposed to be alive in any timeline. Ben's sacrifice and the mutual destruction of the Marigold and the Durango then actually work, and the timeline goes back to normal. So after the big explosion / resolution battle scene thing, we end up following Five, and Five basically just blinks out of existence as soon as it's over. When he comes to, it's actually old Five and he's in a park. He starts to walk around and he sees this big statue surrounded by 46 marigolds. So he comes up to it and he sees that it's a memorial for Ben. As he's standing there, he hears somebody call his name, and when he turns around, he sees Luther, but Luther is about 25 years older. He calls behind him, he's like, guys, it's Five, he's here, and then all of a sudden all the Umbrella Academy and some of the Sparrow Academy people show up, and they're all like, Five, where the hell have you been, Loca? And Five's like, I haven't been anywhere, I just appeared here. They realize that because Five was already mentally 60, when the timeline snapped into place, he went to the future to the same time that everyone else was 60. Everybody's at the park having a picnic / party / just a good old time, celebrating Ben's sacrifice and savior of the world. Luther and Sloane kind of end up back together. Diego and Lila are happy with their children. And maybe even other people have some good endings, okay, for once. Then there's shots of Five looking at his siblings when they're 60 and then getting a flashback of how they looked in the apocalypse. So like he sees Luther 60 and then he sees Luther dead. He sees Allison 60 and then he sees Allison dead. And he realizes that he accomplished his one goal. He saved his family. Five gives the Disney Channel like, I think I'm gonna like it here, kind of nod and smile, and then of course he's like, oh, I'm going to get a drink. Then, just for fun, as Five goes to get a drink, he starts talking to a woman, and when he asks her name, she says that her name is Dolores. And he's like, Dolores, huh? And then the camera kind of floats away as their conversation fades out, and you see an umbrella like floating through the air, and then it gets caught in the frame, and it says, The Umbrella Academy. And then that's the end. Wow, wasn't season 4 actually so good? I understand that there's probably still going to be plot holes with that, but at least it has a satisfying ending and makes sense for the most part, and everybody stays true to their characters. I really am so disappointed at how this ended. There's rumors that either they hired different writers because of the writer's strike, or the entire thing was created by AI, which I don't really believe the second one, but the first one might be true. But regardless, even if you weren't the same writer and you just watched the show, I think you could have created like a semi-decent ending. The people writing The Umbrella Academy Season 4 they didn't care. They really didn't. Anyway, that's it for today, guys. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and as always, have a great rest of your day.